One of the central components of regression-to-cause hypnosis is parts work. Parts work involves a process of facilitating a dialogue between different parts of the client. For example, the inner child work of regression hypnosis involves a conversation between the grown-up part and a child part of the client. And forgiveness work involves a dialogue between the client and the person who hurt them in the past. So dialoguing with different parts of the client is central to the work of regression-to-cause hypnosis. But what if the part isn't willing to participate? What if the child part refuses to speak to the grown-up part? What do you do? The three primary parts we work with in regression hypnosis are the child part, the adult or grown-up part of the client, and the parent or offender parts. All three are internal parts of the client. The child is a feeling part of the client. So this is the client's younger self, and they have many, many inner child parts. It's not just one part. The grown-up part is the adult consciousness of the client. So this is the part of them that's able to use thinking and reasoning and analysis to make sense of things. And this is an important part of the healing process. Parent parts and offender parts or perpetrators are other people who have contributed to the client's issue. And these people have been internalized by the client. They're internal representations based on specific experiences that that person had in the past. When you transform a part, it changes how the client thinks and how they feel and how they behave in their daily life. But to create these changes, you need the cooperation of the parts that are contributing to the problem. When parts aren't willing to cooperate, there's always a reason. It's because there's a block. So this is something that needs to be resolved to get a complete resolution of the client's problem. For example, let's say the child part isn't willing to communicate with the grown-up part. Well, this shows you that there's an internal conflict, and that block is a symptom of the client's overall problem. This is definitely something that needs to be resolved for the client to feel good about themselves. But it can block you from doing the inner child work. So you need to stop right there and deal with that resistance. That's what it is. It's resistance. Now, when you bump into resistance, you might just be tempted to switch to a different technique, but I wouldn't recommend it. This just gives the client permission to continue avoiding the real problem, and avoidance is always a major part of the problem. Just know that when you bump into resistance, you're on the money, okay? That's the next step. The next step is to resolve that block. So grab the bull by the horns and focus on that feeling, because when there's a block, there's always a reason. So find out what that reason is. Regression-to-cause hypnosis is all about getting to the why. So why does the child not trust the adult part? Why is the child so unwilling to speak to the grown-up? This will tell you what the next logical step needs to be in the healing process. Now, most of the time it just comes down to safety. Safety is the subconscious mind's prime directive, and its job is to protect and keep us safe. So most of the time what you'll find is that the block has to do with fear. But you won't know why there's an issue until you ask the child part. A child part is a feeling part. So you need to avoid asking why questions. Don't ask the child why directly. The child doesn't use adult reasoning and logic. So to the child, why questions can feel like being interrogated. And interrogation will cause any part of the client to shut down. All parts need to be treated with love and respect. But you can tease out the answers by using a sentence stems completion exercise. So what is this? Well, stems completion is where you ask the client to complete a sentence by putting an ending on it. For example, you could say something like, repeat after me and put an ending on this. I don't want to speak to grown-up because, and then let the child put an ending on it. Now, this is honoring how the part feels, and it frames things in a way that allows the child to tell you the why without ever asking why. So the child might say, I feel scared, or it's not safe. And now you know what the underlying problem is. That's fear. The idea is to find out why they feel scared without asking why. So you could use the same technique to grind down a little deeper. You could have the child say, I feel scared because, or it's not safe to speak to grown-up because. Because is like a magic word. It gives you the why. And you can use it to quickly grind down to the underlying reason for that particular block. Now, once you know what the underlying fear happens to be, you can find a way to resolve that. And this will allow you to continue on with the healing work, but you need to find out why there's a problem first. Now, sometimes the child part won't talk to the grown-up part because it's angry with grown-up. And this points to a problem of self-rejection and self-blame, and it can generate self-punishing behaviors. Remember, the child is a part of the client. It's a feeling part. So the anger is being directed toward themselves. They're at odds with themselves. They're blocking themselves, and they're very likely punishing themselves because of it. Your job is to find out what happened to cause that anger. So if it looks like there's an anger issue, try using stems completion and have the child say, I won't speak to grown-up because. Now, this can be very empowering for a child, and if you give the child permission to speak the truth of how it feels, it will trust you, and it will gladly tell you what the problem is. So this can reveal the underlying reason for that anger being there. Fear and anger are internal blocks that need to be released. To do that, you need to uncover all the contributing aspects. And the more specific details you can uncover, the more effective you'll be at resolving the whole issue. So, if it's not safe to speak to the grown-up part, you want to find a way to provide safety for the child. And one of the ways you can do this is to suggest to the child that grown-up can't hear us. It's just between the two of us. Or tell grown-up to take a place in the background while you have a talk with the child part. And then invite the child to tell you the whole story. You know, encourage the child to express how she feels by telling her side of the story without the adult part of the mind barging in and criticizing. You know, that's often the problem. The problem for the adult part of the client is that the feeling isn't rational. So it doesn't make sense. And the conscious mind has a need to control, so this sets up an internal conflict. But the key is to validate the feeling. That feeling has a right to be there. So let the child know that she's allowed to feel the way she feels. Now, the conscious mind is never completely out of the picture, and you need it to be present when it comes time to, to do the transformational work of regression hypnosis. So when you place the adult part of the client off on the sidelines or in the background, it's still aware of everything that's still going on. I mean, when you're talking to the child part, you're talking to the client. But what this means is that the client is learning from you. They're learning how you interact with their younger self. And they're learning how to treat the child, and that's with love and respect, right? That's what you want to demonstrate. So you're teaching the client how to treat their younger self. You're teaching them how to treat themselves. And this can help pave the way for greater cooperation on their end. They can learn how to treat themselves with kindness by witnessing how you treat the child. You know, maybe they're beating themselves up. Maybe they're being too hard on themselves. Maybe they're being critical and the child is taking the hit. But they may not realize this. Children are seldom listened to, and this can be a source of frustration and anger, and that can get turned inward. So once you identify what that grievance might be, you need to do something with it. Now, the method you choose will depend entirely on what your training might have been and what specific detail you uncover, but you have a basic choice of how to proceed in this case. You can either stay in the event and just release the feelings, release the fear or the anger or the sadness or whatever feeling the child is still holding on to. And this will give the child some relief. So the child will feel better and the child will trust you more, and it will be safer for the child to express and possibly communicate from that point on. Or you can just bridge off that feeling and go back to an earlier event. So you can regress back further. And you can locate a time when the child is still feeling safe or still feeling loved, or when it's okay to just be who she is and it's safe to express how she feels. So this is a way to resource the client by giving the child an experience of what she most needs. Now, once you've done that, you can find out what happened to cause the client to lose those good feelings, and you'll have a much more resourceful client for doing the inner child work. So how do you decide which approach to use? Well, purging the uncomfortable feelings will release the internal pressure. And once all the internal pressure is gone, the child is going to feel safe again. So releasing is sometimes quicker. Once you've released the block, you can invite the grown-up part back in to have a talk with the child, and the adult can then reprogram the child. But to do that, the child must be willing to listen to the grown-up. So if there's too much resistance, too much fear, too much anger, then you might just find it easier to go back and resource the child first, empower the child, and then bring them back. So you can then come back and continue on with the inner child work. But you know, most of the time, all you need to do is just release the feeling. And this will restore clarity and peace. And when that happens, the mind will become open and receptive to learning. And that's when you can re-educate and reprogram the child to allow the change that you're after. Now, there are many ways to release a feeling. I use tapping. So EFT or tapping. I also use pillow work. So this is where you pump the feeling into a pillow. But you may have other techniques that work just as well. For example, some people use breath work or, shaking to release a feeling. The trick I found is to match the technique to the intensity of the feeling. That's the key. So if there's a lot of internal pressure and there's a lot of intensity, then using a more dramatic approach will get you a deeper release. So how do you measure the intensity of a feeling? Take a SUD. SUD, S-U-D, stands for Subjective Unit of Discomfort. And to take a SUD, all you have to do is ask. Basically, you just ask the part on a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is the worst that feeling's ever been. How strong is that scared feeling? Or how strong is that anger, or whatever the feeling happens to be. And then match the technique to the intensity. So if the emotional intensity is low, like a 4 or a 5 out of 10, you could probably just use talking and tapping to release the feeling. If the intensity is higher, if it's up there like 10 or 12, you'll get much better results using a bigger movement. So that's when I would get out the pillow and get the client really moving that feeling out by pumping it into the pillow. So the bigger the feeling, the bigger the movement. It's more congruent, and you'll get a quicker release. You can get louder too. I mean, if you got a lot of anger and it's up there to a 12, get the client shouting. It's really effective, very empowering for the client. The idea is to give the part permission to feel better by releasing all the pain and the pressure that's been trapped inside, and then give it a way out by giving the feeling a way to express. Now, once the energy of emotion has been released, the client will feel a tremendous sense of relief. That relief will just rush right in, and they'll feel more peaceful. And when a more peaceful state comes in, they'll have more clarity because the child part isn't holding on to all the pain and the pressure anymore, and that was the block. This is when you can invite the grown-up part back into the conversation. Remember, the grown-up or the adult part is the conscious, thinking, rational, logical, analytical, evaluating part of the client. So make sure that the client understands that their subconscious mind is showing them what the real problem has been, and it has everything to do with that feeling. Make sure the grown-up part understands that this is the key to their healing, and that the child is not the problem. The child is never the problem. Child parts are feeling parts, and the feeling is never the problem. It's a part of them that needs to heal. Now, when you're speaking to the conscious mind, you need to make what you're about to ask them to do reasonable. You need to make it rational. So before you invite the adult part in to speak to the child, make sure that you have a grown-up who is willing to be there for the child. You need a grown-up who can be loving and accepting of the child. So make sure that they're ready to be there and support the child. And then tell the adult part of the child, inside of you are the words that the child needs to hear to let go of all that anger or that frustration or that fear or that sadness or whatever the feeling happens to be. Inside of you are the words that need to be spoken to the child. Tell them to find those words. This is far better than anything you could ever come up with. Tell them to tell the child what it most needs to hear, because these are the words that the client most needs to hear. So let the client do the work. Now, one of the biggest temptations when you're just starting out is trying to make the client change. You can't. And if you try, it can generate resistance, and that will just add to the pressure. So relax and make the client responsible for doing the work. You know, for any change to be real and lasting, the change work needs to be done by the client. It's their mind. So let the client do the work, because all healing is self-healing. You just can't do it for them, and you can't make this stuff up. You can coach the process, you can offer suggestions, but the words that will have the greatest impact on the mind of the client will always come from the client. So that's it. When parts aren't willing to communicate, it's because there's a block. And when there's a block, there's always a reason. So find out why there's a block. Something happened to cause that part of the client to feel scared or sad or angry, and it's being brought to conscious awareness because it's relevant to the client's presenting issue, and it may even be the underlying cause. So you need to deal with it. You need to resolve it so that the client can feel safe again. Safety is the subconscious mind's prime directive. And when the client feels safe, the mind will open to allow learning, and that's when healing will happen. That's when those suggestions for change will be accepted. That's when reprogramming can happen. At Tribe of Healers, you'll find plenty of free and low-cost courses that are specifically for regression-to-cause hypnosis. So if you want to learn more about the healing process, if you want to make sense of regression hypnosis, then click on the link in the description area below this video, and I'll see you again soon.